And we are live. Welcome, mystery and thriller fans. I'm your on-air host, Sara DiVello, and I am so excited to welcome to the show tonight, all the way from Southern California, Dr. Thea Sutton, here to give us the skinny on her brand new historical thriller, The Women of Blackmouth Street. Thea, welcome to Mystery and Thriller Mavens. Tell us about this book.
Well, thank you first off, Sara. Before I get to my book, I wanted to say what a wonderful creative space you have here that you've created, bringing readers together, writers together, independent bookstores, bookstores owned by women. So well done. Marvelous. Kudos to you. And thank you very much for allowing me to participate.
My pleasure. Thank you for the kind words. And I am so excited to welcome you to the show. And I love historical. I love history. I love thrillers. So I can't wait to get the scoop on this baby.
Okay. Well, the setting is 1890s London. And that is a very interesting period. Lots of upheaval, social unrest. Women's lives are changing for the better and for the worse. And in that mix, I have created a character, a protagonist. Her name is Georgia Buchanan. She is a Boston heiress with lots of secrets and a very strange vocation. She is an alienist, a mind doctor, which we would today call a psychiatrist or psychologist. She spends her time with the mad, the bad, and with only armed with her very expert understanding of the human psyche, the way the mind works. She is forced to find a killer, someone who is killing women in London's East End, all the while protecting a trio of women with whom she shares a very complicated history. And the threat, of course, is that her own dark episode in her life will be exposed, unless she manages to pull all of this together. So as the killer closes in, Georgia, along with the reader, I think, discovers something that changes her irrevocably. And that discovery is that sometimes people do monstrous things for all the right reasons.
Ooh, well, I can't wait to get into every single bit of it. But first, I just want to welcome everyone who's watching with us, whether you're watching on Facebook, whether you're watching on YouTube, you're watching on my channels, Murder by the Book channels, or in our Facebook group for Mystery and Thriller fans. You're in the right place. This is the right time. And if you love historical as much as I do, if you loved and watched the show The Alienist or read the books,
Right.
This is the place. And we're going to get into 1890s England. So if you've been here before, you know how it works. This is your time to talk to our featured authors. So ask Thea about her book. Ask her about 1890s London. Ask her about her research. Ask her about this character, this Georgia, what she's hiding, how she, how Thea crafted a compelling plot. Let's get into it. Get the questions going or comments in the comment section, and I will get them right over to her. So Thea, I'm going to kick off. One of my favorite reviews is from Kate Weinberg, author of The Truants, one of the New York Times 10 best crime novels of 2020. She raves Thea Sutton's prose combines gothic relish with surgical lancing precision, compelling, original, and brilliantly disturbing. So let's get into every single piece of that. First of all, let us into your process. How does one create a gothic relish with a surgical lancing compelling component? Give us the skinny.
Well, I have to say that really Georgia Buchanan stalked me, not the other way around. And in order to write 80, 90,000 words, you really have to be obsessed. I think this is something about authors. In order to complete a novel, you've just got to be obsessed. You've got to want to scratch that itch. So if an idea or an impression comes into your mind, but it doesn't sort of take over your life, chances are you're not going to be able to see it through to the end. So the way the character of Georgia Buchanan started stalking me happened to be one day in London, England. I was waiting for my husband. He was at a meeting in a hospital, an old, very sort of majestic, but at the same time crumbling hospital in London. I'm waiting for him in the entranceway, and he's a bit late. So I thought, well, I'm going to check this place out. So I wandered down a hallway, and I found some very, very interesting memorabilia. So photographs and manuscripts detailing a period of sort of 1880s, 1890s in the life of the hospital. And I came across this photograph of a woman in obviously 1880s, 1890s costume, and she's walking up the stairs, and I just see her from behind. Her shoulders are squared, and her head is sort of tipped to the side, and I just see her in profile. And I wondered, this woman, she just seemed to be so self-possessed. I thought, where is she going? Who is she? And I kind of forgot about it. 1 year later, I am in Vienna, Austria, and I'm touring Sigmund Freud, who of course is, the master of, some would argue, of psychoanalysis and the whole idea of psychiatry and psychotherapy. And his home has been turned into a museum. I am looking at some of the sort of interesting memorabilia, again, the manuscripts, books, collection of his, some artworks, came across this photograph. And it's the same photograph of the woman that I saw in the London hospital. So at this point, I thought, again, this can't be coincidence. She's following me around. I have to write about her. And that's how Georgia Buchanan, that was the seed of Georgia Buchanan.
And is that this woman's name? Was she a student of Freud, or we don't know?
No, I don't know. I totally made it up. So the women like Georgia Buchanan did exist, but it was just something about this photograph, this figure, this woman walking up the stairs into this institution that got me into the story.
Oh my gosh, Thea, that's crazy. What are the chances you see a photograph from 1890s hospital, an 1890s hospital in London, and then see the same photograph in Sigmund Freud's house? That's crazy. What are the chances that you see the same photograph, that the same photograph even exists? How bizarre. How fascinating. And then why did you place Georgia in Boston, where she has a secret that she's dying to protect as well? Why Boston?
Yes. Well, this was, Georgia is really an amalgam of a lot of women of the day. And there were many Boston heiresses, relatively privileged white women who were beginning to go out into the world in greater numbers and with more confidence. As I mentioned earlier, the 1890s was, some would call it the birth of the modern age. So because of greater opportunities for education for women, divorce laws, which allowed women a modicum of freedom, also opportunities, believe it or not, even for employment. And of course, with that came great exploitation as well in factories and sex work, etc., which the Women of Blackmouth Street also explores through some of the characters in the novel. But all of that gave rise to characters like Georgia Buchanan going out into the world. And some good examples, we all know Florence Nightingale. She changed the world of nursing. Ada Lovelace, arguably the first computer engineer. We have, of course, the suffragette movement getting up some steam for the vote for women. So a lot of these things were happening, and Boston was very much a center for this. So a center of wealth, as well as a center for education. So I thought that might be a good place to put her.
Well, I may be biased, but I happen to agree. Margaret Bernard joining us from the Pacific Northwest. Welcome to the conversation, saying, yay, we
Margaret.
love an 1890s heroine. Margaret, right? Um, there's something about that time that is so cool. And for those of us who love historical fiction, who love historical thrillers, I mean, we are here for it. Margaret, thanks for joining the conversation. Let us know if you have any questions for Thea. Welcome, Susan. Welcome, Sandra. Welcome, Alan. Welcome, Audrey. Welcome, Emily and Brad. Great to have you all with us tonight. Let me know if you have any questions for Thea. Another of my favorite reviews, and there are many, is Linda L. Richards, best-selling author of Ending, says the Victorian era London of Thea Sutton's confident debut is gray, stark, and utterly compelling. The Women of Blackmouth Street is deeply satisfying. Highly recommend. Let's talk about how you craft a deeply satisfying book, because it's not easy to do. Let's get into it. What do you think the secret is? Oh, Thea. Oh, wait, Thea is frozen. And you know what? That's okay. It's sometimes that happens. Let me see if she's going to come back. And you know what? When I freeze, I never have a flattering face on. So Thea is lucky that she has frozen with a great look. Margaret is saying currently studying Settlement House, and Thea's back. Yay.
I lost you there.
No worries at all. Margaret saying currently studying settlement house movements in that decade. Some great movers and shakers involved there. Thea, your response.
The reason the 1890s, 1900s is so interesting is because of movements like the settlement house movement. There's so many parallels to today.
Ooh.
We have the rise of unions, the rise of socialism, again, the suffragette movement, all sorts of discoveries in medicine around the areas of X-ray, vaccines, germ theory. So there are a lot of overlaps. There was also sort of a real underbelly in the 1890s that's very much similar to some of the things we're experiencing right now. Incredible divisions between individuals, this great disparity between the poor and the wealthy. At the time in the 1890s, it was called the Gilded Age. 10% of the population owned, some said, 3/4 of the wealth in North America. So, you know, there were a lot of fissures, there were a lot of changes, there was a lot of social upheaval. And with that, good things come out of that, but there's also a lot of pain and exploitation that goes.
Oh no, we've lost Thea again. Or have we? Is she coming back? Let me see what's going on here. Margaret also saying, do you have an idea for an updated Gilded Age moniker? Platinum Plated Age, perhaps? Well, I absolutely love that idea. Oh no, we've lost Thea. That's okay. These things happen. I'm going to entertain you here. If I have to, I'll sing, I'll dance. Margaret, I love that idea of a Gilded Age moniker. Platinum Plated Age is a great opportunity, is a great first whack at it. Or maybe you've been working on this for a while. Thea, what about it? Do you have an idea for an updated Gilded Age moniker?
Well, you know, that's a great question. And what I think of, and I'm actually trying to come up with a new name for the Gilded Age, something that has a little bit of resonance for our own current period. But remember, gilded means not gold-plated. Gilded means sort of a very cheap coating that can hide a lot of decay underneath. So it really speaks to that we're just trying to sort of cover up a lot of things that we should actually be addressing and remedying. So great question. I haven't come up with anything, but I've certainly given it a lot of thought.
I love it. Thea, you mentioned that there were a lot of opportunities for women coming up in the 1890s, but also a lot of exploitation. And you touch on that. You get into that in your book. In the discovery of the first body that we see Georgia called to the scene of, they refer to her interchangeably as both an actress and a prostitute. Why were those two professions interchangeable then? And I was interested and curious about that. Let's talk about this actress prostitute thing.
Well, the quick and easy answer to that is that actresses couldn't make enough money to support themselves. So very often they had to turn to sex work in order to support themselves. And that was not just the case with actresses, that was also the case with domestic servants, uh, most of whom were women, women who worked in factories as well. Sometimes the only way to make ends meet was to turn to sex work. And many of them didn't do it full time. It was something that, as an actress, that you could somehow do on the side. But it was very, very necessary to keep body and soul together. And as I mentioned earlier, on the one hand, we have lots of opportunities for women at this point in time. But like the Gilded Age, flip that on its side and look at the underbelly. There's all sorts of opportunity for exploitation as well. So women going into factories, they're going out to work. They are going out to work, but the conditions of workplaces were not something that you would particularly say that it was sort of a guaranteed sort of safe space for them to earn a living.
Fascinating. Margaret asking, is there such a thing as a platinum leaf? LOL. There could be.
There could be, very well be, yes.
Let's talk about your research process. You have a PhD, so clearly you are no stranger to research. Take us through what your research process entailed, getting into what life in the 1890s was like at all for women. At one scene, Georgia goes into a mortuary, a morgue, where someone is performing an autopsy with antiquated tools like a saw that you have to do with your hand. I was scared of the tools, but I had a feeling they were accurate. Let's talk about that research process.
Well, first off, I have to say, I've been asked that question. Did I make anything up just for effect? Did I invent this just to make it all the more gruesome or harrowing? And I'm sad to say I did not make any of it up. If anything, I left a lot of the more gruesome aspects out of the book. So yeah, medicine in general, wasn't particularly advanced in the 1890s. And certainly when it came to autopsies, when it came to mental illness, when it came to just very primitive surgeries, we would be shocked. And as I said, I left out a lot of other gory details. So no, I mean, it's absolutely accurate, absolutely accurate. And secondly, to do the research, with my PhD, of course, I had to read a lot of books written in that time period. Henry James, for instance, Edith Wharton. So I kind of absorbed the feel, what it kind of felt like, what it looked like, how people behaved. So that really wasn't the challenge for me, so much as learning to understand sort of the mental health issues of the day, and how often women were put in a box and are still put in a box. And when they want to get out, back in the 1890s, in that period, of course, they were often labeled hysterical or mad or insane. And remember, too, a husband could commit his wife or daughter to an asylum on the flimsiest of pretexts. So it didn't take much. And she could be sort of, shunted away to an asylum.
How often did that happen, Thea? I mean, was that like, hey, it's Tuesday,
Yeah, I mean, there again, if a woman, for instance, and we have some characters in the novel who were too interested in studying, for instance, and they didn't necessarily want to get married, or they didn't want to have children. That was considered peculiar. That was considered unusual. If a woman defied her husband too much, well, she was unruly, maybe she was mad, maybe there was something infecting her blood or whatnot. There was an illness because she refused to stay in that box. So all of these things were of interest to me, and I had a little bit of experience in the area of mental health. I did some volunteer work with psychiatric patients, helping them journal. Journaling is very helpful in many ways for all of us to come to terms sometimes with our feelings, our thoughts, what happens to us, how we respond, how we react. And in those sessions, I met some incredible people who had sad, courageous, amazing stories, which got me thinking. And I came away from that experience with a lot of empathy and curiosity as well about mental illness.
Fascinating. Sharon, welcome to the conversation, saying this is all so frightening. And it is, Sharon. I was just thinking that how very terrifying and what a fragile position women would have been in at that time, because if you didn't comply, your male protector, right, your father or husband, would put you in a really terrifying, dangerous place, which you probably weren't going to get out of. And so the ability to commit a woman becomes a way to enforce compliance. Terrifying, frightening indeed. Sharon, thank you for the comment. Thea, I'm especially interested to hear that women who didn't want to have children were considered damaged, mad. What was it?
Absolutely. They were considered unnatural. And you notice the book begins with the doctor saying the word hysteria.
So indeed, I did notice that.
And hysteria, of course, at the time was considered a female illness. And the root word of hysteria, of course, is the womb, the uterus. So the madness must be coming from there, because otherwise she would comply and become a wife and a mother. Or alternatively, and we explore this as well in the novel, characters who are poor are often considered nuts, crazy, marginalized. So off they go to the poorhouse, or off they go to an asylum if they're considered somehow not useful. If they don't stay in the box that they're put in.
Wow. Fascinating and terrifying indeed. Carol McCleary raving that this is a carefully crafted psychological thriller. She is, of course, the author of the Nellie Bly series. I liked that she noted that your careful research and careful constructing of this. Jenna Kalinsky raving that the Women of Blackmouth Street is submerges the reader into a heady, brutal past with uncompromising mind Dr. Georgia Buchanan and her fierce desire to save the most vulnerable. Of course, her desire to save the most vulnerable takes her into the asylums, which are pretty scary places. Welcome to the conversation, Melissa, Bradley, Ricky, and Jennifer, and Ava. Great to have you. Michelle and Kathy, great to have you as well. Eloise, thanks for joining, and Susan as well. Let us know if you have any questions for Thea. Margaret is saying, it's me. Absolutely, Margaret. Yes. Thea, let's talk about this book featuring a strong female character. Is a love song to strong female characters. Why this book? Why now?
Well, thank you for saying that, because I have always been interested in strong women characters, and they've always been with us. It's just not something that we invented in 2020. I've always felt there've been strong women out there, and I want to go where they go and follow them. And I think we are rediscovering a lot of their stories. We're unearthing a lot of their stories. And that's why it's so important to see where women were, what they were doing, what they were thinking, creating fully formed women characters in the past. Because if we forget our history, we of course are sometimes going to, fall into that horrible pattern of having to repeat it. So it's important that we capture those stories of women. And secondly, I think it's really important to acknowledge that history is always written by the person who wins, the victor. And that's usually, of course, a man, men, white privileged men. So it's time right now to say other people can write history, reinterpret history, recreate history. We have to pass the baton, the microphone, the keyboard, and have other voices talk about and reinterpret history. And what about Bridgerton, for example, recently? That is a great, fun period romp, and it has got an incredibly diverse characters and crew of actors. And why not reimagine the past in that way?
Exactly. I am leaning in for Bridgerton. Anyone else? I thoroughly enjoyed Shonda Rhimes's wonderfully entertaining, wonderfully diverse retelling of the Bridgerton series. I absolutely loved every moment of it. Margaret saying the mic is ours to drop now. Yes, ma'am. I love that. And we continue to see that impact spiral out with Now the Great, featuring a retelling of Catherine the Great of Russia, which I am in season 2 and thoroughly enjoying. Anyone else, let me know in the comments. I absolutely, I mean, clearly I love history. So I minored in history. I love historical books. I love retelling of history. Especially European history. It's so fascinating. Thea, let's talk about the fact that you hold a PhD in English literature. So you're Dr. Sutton. How has that impacted your writing of this book in either positive, negative, or neutral ways? Did it impact it?
Well, one thing when you have a PhD, you know all about literature, but you don't have the first clue about how to write a book. Really, it's
that
sort of an
surprises
interesting
me.
thing. Yes, it's true. The actual structure of books, how they come together, is a craft. It's very much a craft. So that's something that I had to learn. And it helps that I love reading thrillers. I love reading mysteries. So, of course, there's a lot of really great examples that I could follow and be inspired by. So, yeah, I would say, strangely enough, having a PhD in literature has you understanding themes and characters and different genres, but the actual mechanics of writing not particularly helpful. So I'm being honest there.
Interesting. Margaret's saying she hasn't watched The Great yet, but the teasers are hilarious. It's only bragging if it's not true. Exactly.
Right.
If one simply is great, it's not bragging to have one's name be Catherine the Great. Margaret, you will love it. I'm thoroughly entertained. Thea, I am surprised that holding a PhD in English literature did not help give you a leg up into the writing of this book. That is fascinating to hear. One thing that I have noticed as I have segued over to the mystery and thriller realm is that some people seem to have a literary bias or snobbery about the genre, which really is perplexing and frustrating to me. Why do you think that is? What's under it?
I am so glad that you brought that up. I really am, because that is a bone that I really like to pick. I really truly believe that this idea of sort of high literature and, shall we say, lowbrow literature is very much a recent invention. If you take a look at Charles Dickens, he was writing, he was being paid by the word. So he was writing for periodicals, so like magazines. So if he churned out X number of words every week and kept people hanging, at the end of the last period, just desperate for the next installment for which he would be paid, he was doing really well. So he was basically grinding out these pieces for entertainment and for money. Nothing wrong with that. And it's only 100 years later that we've decided that this is literature, that this is considered a highbrow literature versus sort of the more popular literature. So that's happened very, very recently, this weird divide between, what we consider, worthwhile reading and say like the bias against thrillers or mysteries, etc. And I think it's totally unwarranted. And increasingly as well, you'll see, and my own PhD focus was on writers like Toni Morrison, Joyce Carol Oates, Anne Rice. So the idea that the popular can't also be literary, I just think it's a silly argument, and I don't know why we throw that out. Other than, I will say, often women writers are often considered popular writers as opposed to literary writers or writers of literature. So that's, I think, a bit of a gender bias as well.
Indeed, because I also see that bias against romance writers, even though, for instance, Stacey Abrams wrote romance novels whilst going to Yale Law School, clearly a high-achieving, brilliant woman going to one of the greatest universities, most well-respected universities in the world, and yet this bias against thrillers, this snobbery, and I don't understand. First of all, I didn't know it existed until I started doing this series, and I started to hear about it and notice it, and I still haven't been able to get down to the root of it. But I think I'm fascinated to hear you say that, to note that there's this female author component, because indeed that is true. We're getting lots of likes and hearts up from Facebook, so clearly this is resonating. Thank you all for those. Very, very fascinating stuff. Thea, another great review that you got, Anthony Antanasio, the film director of The Persistence of Memory, raving that your writing is elegant and powerful. He goes on, but I just want to pause there for a moment and talk about elegant, powerful writing, because again, we're talking about this bias against thrillers. And yet here, Dr. Thea Sutton, with her PhD in English literature, is getting rave reviews for her elegant, powerful writing. Let's talk about that. What does your process of crafting elegant, powerful writing look like? Do you rise with the sun? Do you flow effortlessly into your desk? Do the words pour forth from you like sunshine and rainbows? Or are you Hemingway, just clawing your way through a desert day drinking to wrest every word from the jaws of brilliance? I mean, what's it look like?
It depends on the day, Sarah. It depends on the day. But I would have to say that for me, writing is like watching a film in my head on spool. So I'm watching images in my mind, and then I'm writing down words that I hope match those images. So that would be the first part of the process. And unless I have that movie in my head, even though it might be out of order and it might be snippets of this and that, I've got to have that unspooling. And then I put out a first draft, and I try not to be too hard on myself. And I should add here as well, back to your question about literature versus thrillers and mysteries and so-called popular writing, you realize that you can't be that hard on yourself, that truly so much is open to interpretation. Every generation elevates its writers, to for one generation, it's Hemingway. For another generation, it is Joyce Carol Oates, or for another generation, it is Dickens. These things change constantly. So I think when you're writing, you just have to sort of let all of that judgment go as to what's good and what's not and how it'll be judged, and just sort of get it on the page. And it's got to be an obsession, and it's got to be, frankly, fun. It's got to be amusing. You have to want to do it. Otherwise, you're not going to get to 90,000 words. You're going to run out of steam. So yeah, the process is the film in the head and get it down on paper.
How long did it take you to write this book? Because I have to say, I'm holding it upside down. As I've been reading it, I, much like my clearly fellow Italian, Anthony Antonaccio, is saying the writing is elegant and the writing is polished. So I could tell that you spent time on this, a lot of time on this. There is a depth, there is a complexity, there is a well-honed suppleness to the writing that I thought to myself, this book took some time. It baked for a while. This wasn't this wasn't a quickie. How long did it take you, start to finish?
Yeah, it took me 3 years. 3 years. Mm-hmm. And I did work on it. The fun part for me, when you were asking about the process, is really the editing. Because really? You're happy, you've got something in front of you. It's not a blank page. And now you can start playing with the words. You can start refining the phrases. You can start moving things around, so that you're playing a little more. And that's a little more fun than when you're faced with this movie in your head that you've got to get down on paper. So.
I have to say, Thea, I my husband always says I have no poker face, and that is clear. If I think it, you can see it, and you probably saw my shocked face at hearing you describe editing as fun, because editing is the most miserable, hardest part for me. I am Hemingway, clawing myself through the desert on the editing process. I freaking hate editing. It is a soul sucking, miserable slog through the mud for me. So, because I think it's so hard. You know what's hard for me is the infinite possibilities of it. It's not math, and I hate math. But there's no right answer. You never can get to 2 and 2 is controvertible. 2 plus 2 is incontrovertibly 4. There's no two ways about that. And when you get to 4, you know you've gotten to the right answer. But with writing, you could have opened with the book in London. You could have opened with the book in Boston. You could have opened with the scene you could have opened with the scene in the moor. You could have opened with the body. There's an infinite number of possibilities, and it drives me crazy, and I get overwhelmed. So what do you like about it, and how come it's not like that for you? I'm asking for a friend, and the friend is
yeah, no, these are all, and it's interesting to get these different perspectives. And I think for me, I love the editing because I have those infinite possibilities. When I only have one, if I have, let's say, 20 pages, and I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, if this has legs, if this thing is going to move in the right direction, that's where I can get a little worried and a little scared. But once I have masses of writing, it's kind of fun just sort of rearranging things and moving things around and trying on things for size. At least I've got something I'm working with. Like, I've got the clay, I've got the marble that I can now start chipping away at. But if I don't have that big mound of clay or that piece of marble that I can chip away at, I start to get worried. And that's a little more anxiety inducing for me.
Fascinating. Okay, perfect. I am going to try to step into your positivity and stop, throwing myself on the floor and kicking and screaming, which is my usual process. Carolina Callio saying hello, sending you love and applause. Carolina, welcome to the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Y'all, I just want to remind you, this book is available, and you can grab it tonight from Murder by the Book and support a woman-owned independent bookstore, one of 3 dedicated mystery stores in the world. And you can grab it right now. I just popped the link in the comments. Here you go. So if you love historical, if you love London, if you love turn of the century books, the 1890s, if you love Sherlock Holmes, if you love The Alienist, this book is for you. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And you too can grab your copy of this elegantly written, powerfully written book. So raves Anthony Antanasio. So grab your copy right now. Thea, one last question that came in was, you have said that there's a thin line between readers and writers. What did you mean by that?
Well, as we started out tonight, I really did mean that this is a great space that you've created for readers and for authors. I think many readers would like to be authors, and every author started as a reader. Even the process of writing is similar to reading. You have, again, a movie in your head or an idea, and you try to capture that, interpret that on the page. And if you're reading, essentially, if the writing resonates for you, suddenly you've got a movie and images unspooling in your mind's eye. So it's almost like the reverse process. And the two are, I think, very much linked.
Ooh, that is such a fascinating and insightful point. I love that perspective. And you're so right, because I do see it as a movie when I'm reading it. I'm such a visual person, so I actually do see it in my head. And I think a lot of us do. That's such a cool, true, insightful insight that you had. Thank you so much, Thea. Sharon is saying she just loves book written in this time frame. Sharon, me too, right? I love hearing about the reticule. George is always carrying her reticule, and she has her little notebook with her little gold pen and her reticule as she's, tromping all over London, tracking down the serial killer who's targeting women. I love that too. I love the horses, the carriages, the cobbled streets. I love all those lovely historical details. Sharon, we're vibing as we always do. Karen, welcome to the conversation. She's saying this one is going to be sent to the hubby for my Christmas list. Absolutely, Karen.
Oh.
And Karen, I think if you're a member of the Facebook group, if you're not, come join. Just pop the link in the comments. Thea is also a member of my private Facebook group, Mystery and Thriller Mavens, where we continue the conversation after the interview. So Thea is there to chat more about her book over in the group. So come join us, everyone. If you love mysteries and thrillers, come join us there. Well, Thea Sutton, thank you so much for giving us the skinny on your book, on your process, all of this. Such a meaty, fascinating, fabulous conversation. Y'all grab your copy of this book. Put it on your Christmas list. Tell the little elves this is what you want. And links so that you can just, in the comments, you can just go ahead and forward it to the aforementioned elves, and they can bring it in your Christmas stocking.
That's a great idea.
Y'all, thank you so much for joining me. Thea, thank you for joining us. We'll look forward to continue the conversation in the Facebook group, Mystery and Thriller Mavens. Y'all, I'll be back at the top of the hour with Gabriel Valjean here to tell us about his historical thriller set in the McCarthy era in the U.S. I'll see you then.
Thank you so much, Sara, and everyone who joined us.
Thanks, Thea.
Bye-bye.